Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
I remember the moment I said the word no as clearly as I remember my own name. We were standing in our kitchen, late afternoon light slicing through the blinds and painting stripes across the countertops. Kyla leaned against the island, her arms folded, lips curved in that pleading, hopeful way she had when she knew I'd cave. "Just for a while," she said, her voice soft, coaxing. "Ronan's in a rough spot. He'll only be here until he gets back on his feet." I looked past her at the sliding glass door that led to our small backyard. Beyond it, our neighbor's dog chased its tail in endless circles. I realized then that I'd seen Ronan's wiles before, endless loops of entitlement, loud laughter that echoed through my childhood home, and a habit of borrowing money, always promising he'd pay me back soon, which never happened. So I met Kyla's eyes, tipped my head back, and exhaled slowly. "No." Her expression shuddered for the barest second before she recited her rehearsed reply. "But he's family." I didn't argue the point. I simply repeated, "No," with the same calm tone I'd use in a boardroom when declining a terrible offer. She opened her mouth, then shut it, as if she were tasting something bitter. I thought the conversation was over, until the next evening, when I found my life piled into black garbage bags. I arrived home just after 6, the sky a bruised blend of pink and gray, and flicked on the front porch light. The windows of our house shone cheaply in the dusky gloom. Inside, every soft glow of the lamps was gone. No warm welcome. No footfalls behind the door. Instead, I found our garage light on, and there, in the center of the concrete floor, leaning against the wall, towered a mountain of garbage bags stuffed so full they looked ready to burst. My clothes, my toolboxes, my work files, even the framed certificates from my college days were jammed in those bags. A single folding chair sat in front of them, and on that chair was Yvette, Kyla's mother, perched like a queen on an improvised throne. The moment I stepped through the garage door, her lips curled into a smug smile. She wore my old hoodie, the one I'd thought lost years ago, and sipped from my favorite coffee mug, the rim chipped but polished by daily use. She looked at me over the rim of the mug. "You don't get to control family decisions," she stated as if quoting chapter and verse from some sacred text. Her tone wasn't loud or angry. It was flat and condescending, as though I were a disagreeable child who needed correcting. I felt my jaw tighten. My throat worked around a knot of surprise and hurt. I'd expected Kyla to protest, maybe cry, or at least plead. Instead, she stood behind her mother, hands fisted at her sides, eyes cast downward. She said nothing. In that silence, I realized I wasn't just being shut out of my own home. I was being erased. I choked out, "Kyla, what is this? Why are you letting her do this?" My voice betrayed more hurt than anger. I was trapped somewhere between disbelief and rage. Yvette set the mug down and extended her free hand toward Kyla in a slow, deliberate gesture. "Honey," she said softly, "go enjoy your evening. We'll handle this." My wife answered me with her silence, her gaze drifting to the floor, then to the garage floor, where my life was bagged and waiting. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stepped forward. "These are my things," I said, nodding toward the mound. "My tools. My files. You can't just—" My voice trailed off. Yvette waved me back. "Your things are right there," she said cheerfully. "But if I were you, I'd just take a seat and let the adults talk." She patted the folding chair next to her. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Had I not been the one betrayed, had my life not been appended in a single evening. Instead, I swallowed hard and took a seat, the plastic legs of the chair groaning beneath my weight. I stared at the bags. My hands itched to rip them open, to toss out everything that wasn't mine. Kyla's dresses, her shoes, any trace of her presence. But I controlled the impulse. I needed answers, not more chaos. So I sat, shoulders hunched, as Yvette perched back in her chair and crossed her legs. She began her litany of grievances as though she were reading from a script. "Your father didn't treat my daughter right. You've been distant. You've been neglectful. And then you refused to help Ronan." Her voice dripped with accusation. I closed my eyes and counted silently. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. I forced myself to breathe evenly. When she paused for effect, I spoke. "You're in my house," I said quietly. "My home. And you're using my things to make your point. What did you think would happen when you locked me out?" My question echoed in the empty space between us. She tilted her head back, smoothing her lips over her teeth with satisfaction. "Your wife and I decided for you," she said. You had your chance to be part of the family. You said no. So now you can leave. A second later, I felt Kyla's presence beside me. Her shadow, really, because she stayed behind me on the periphery, unwilling to face me. I didn't turn around. Instead, I stood slowly, the chair scraping against the concrete, and breathed in the air that smelled faintly of gasoline and spilled coffee. I looked at my mother-in-law and said, "Fine, I'll leave, but not before I get my things." My voice was low but steady. Yvette shrugged, as if I were beneath her concern. "They're all there. Your things. Just pack and go." Then she lifted her mug and sipped as though our confrontation were merely afternoon tea. I turned and walked out of the garage with my hands in my pockets, my heart twisting with betrayal. In the dusk, I closed the door behind me and leaned my forehead against the cool metal. I let out a long breath, tasting bitterness and resolve in the same exhale. This was no longer a spat over a cousin moving in. This was war, and I had just accepted the battle. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I simply walked away. When the door closed behind me, the world felt hollow, like an echo trapped in a canyon. I climbed into my car, heart pounding in a rhythm that felt too fast, too urgent. My hands gripped the steering wheel as if I could steer away from the betrayal. I drove without a destination in mind, weaving through streets I knew by heart, the streetlights blurring into ribbons of yellow and white. Eventually, I found myself in front of a small, unassuming hotel, the kind with flickering neon letters and a parking lot that smelled faintly of gasoline and wet pavement. I pulled up to the front desk, paid with my debit card, and attempted to check in. The clerk behind the counter offered me a polite smile as he slid the card reader toward me. I tapped the keypad, entered my PIN, and watched the machine's screen blink and compute. Then his smile tightened, and his eyes flicked to the display. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, voice clipped. "That transaction can't be processed. Your card's been declined." The dentist's suction device in my memory, sharp, intrusive, unwanted, made me wince. I swallowed around a lump in my throat and handed the card back. "Declined?" I echoed. It felt as though the earth had shifted beneath my feet. The clerk gave me a sympathetic nod and printed a receipt I didn't want, then placed it on the counter. "You might want to contact your bank." I stepped back into the hallway, each footstep ringing against the linoleum floor. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the back of the card, pulse thundering in my ears. "Thank you for calling," the automated voice said, so cheerful it was sickening. I navigated the prompts, pressing numbers to reach a real person. When the bank representative came on the line, I learned the truth in blunt terms that felt as sharp as broken glass. The primary account owner was changed yesterday, she informed me, tone neutral, registering neither pity nor surprise. "Mr. Archer is no longer an authorized signer on that account." My heart stopped. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and asked, "In my name?" She clicked through her screen. "Removed." Then, with procedural calmness, she added, "A new checking account was opened, and nearly all funds were transferred out yesterday afternoon." It was like listening to someone describe a scene of devastation, one they had meticulously orchestrated behind my back. I sank down on the curb outside the hotel, back against the building's painted brick. The night air was cool, laden with the scent of damp asphalt and distant exhaust. My mind raced as if trapped in a washing machine set on high. Traces of recent paychecks, emergency savings, rent money, all vanished. I felt the slick of tears at the corners of my eyes, but blinked them back. This wasn't about a cousin moving in or a disagreement over generosity. This was something deeper, colder, a full-scale assault on my life. I thought of Kyla's face, expressionless, distant, retreating as her mother assumed control of our home. I recalled the way Yvette lifted her coffee mug and dismissed me with that patronizing tone, as though I were a minor inconvenience in her grand design. I remembered the plastic bag containing my grandfather's old tool set, now probably on someone else's shelf, and my carefully organized work files, essential for deadlines I couldn't meet now. I gripped my phone tighter, thumb hovering over the dial that would connect me to emergency services or a lawyer. But first, I needed proof. I needed direction. I stood and brushed grit from my jeans, then re-entered the lobby. The clerk glanced at me as I approached, concern flickering in his eyes. "Everything all right, sir?" he asked. My voice was quieter than I'd intended. "No," I said flatly. "It's not all right." He appeared to want to help, but didn't know how. I mumbled an apology and turned away, striding to my car. The engine idled as I called Mateo Parrish, my lawyer, sharp, efficient, someone who never underestimated a fight worth having. His voicemail picked up, and I left a terse message. Ronan moved in. Accounts locked. Funds transferred. Need to talk ASAP. I ended the call and sat in silence, headlights cutting arcs of brightness across the asphalt parking lot. I replayed the bank's words, removed as an authorized signer. That phrase loomed over me like a verdict. I fished my wallet from my pocket, fingers brushing the few bills I had slipped into the back for emergencies. I checked the balance on a backup credit card, declined. I tried another, declined. Panic fluttered in my chest, but I forced calm. I could get through this. I had no choice. I shut off the engine, climbed out, and walked around to the trunk. From beneath a tarp-covered box, I pulled out my toolkit, my most reliable possession. If they thought they could erase me, they hadn't accounted for my resilience. I called Arlo, my coworker and one of the few people who knew our situation was precarious. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, man," he said, concerned. I swallowed, voice raw. "I need a place to crash. My account's been emptied. My home's..." I trailed off, emotion choking me. Arlo didn't hesitate. "Anytime. I'll text you the address. You're not alone." I drove to his apartment, tires whispering against the road. In the passenger seat lay the single change of clothes I managed to grab before my bank access was revoked. I stared at the empty spot on the passenger door where I used to stash emergency cash. No longer there. I felt unnerved, but also oddly focused. This wasn't just a dispute, it was a declaration of war. If they wanted to erase me, they would soon learn how indelible I could be. That night, I slept in Arlo's spare room, exhaustion finally catching up with me. But sleep was fitful, haunted by dreams of Yvette sipping coffee on my couch and Ronan lounging in my armchair. In those dreams I woke up, drenched in sweat, certain I would never reclaim my life. And then I sat up, heartbeat pounding, and reminded myself I would get it back. This wasn't about hospitality or family loyalty. This was about power, trust, and the raw edges of betrayal. And I would see it through, no matter what. I spent that night parked 2 blocks from my house, windows fogged by my own breath. My car was the only place I felt secure enough to think. The street lamp outside cast a pale glow through the windshield, illuminating a world that felt cruelly upside down. I replayed every moment since I'd pushed open the garage door. Kyla's silence, Yvette's smirk, the suffocating sight of my life bagged into garbage sacks. I stroked the steering wheel, fingers trailing over the leather until I could almost feel the warmth of my old routine, driving home from work, grabbing a quick dinner in the kitchen I'd once loved, trading jokes with Kyla about our next vacation. But all that was gone, stripped away in a single evening. Morning came pale and cold. I slept fitfully, waking every hour to check the rearview mirror, unsure if someone had followed me. Eventually, I threw back the car door, leaped out into the crunchy grass, and made my way to the bank, first on the list of tasks I needed to address. The bank was a dull, windowless building with fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead and a lobby carpeted in industrial gray. The guard at the door barely glanced as I walked in, but I recognized the weight of my own desperation in the way my shoulders sagged. Inside, I sat at a customer service desk and recounted the story: locked accounts, stolen funds, my name erased. The manager's expression shifted from polite detachment to sharp interest. He asked questions, dates, transaction amounts, account numbers. Every detail I gave felt like a stitch in a case I'd soon build. At least they listened. Armed with the bank's confirmation that Kyla had indeed removed me as an authorized signer and transferred funds, even opening a new account in my absence, I walked out clutching a stack of printed statements. Each sheet was a testament to betrayal, lines of numbers that represented my late paychecks, emergency savings, and months of careful planning. My name, once affixed boldly on the account, had vanished like chalk in the rain. I folded the papers and slipped them into my messenger bag, alongside my toolbox, my grandfather's set of wrenches and sockets that meant more to me than their utility. If life had become a battleground, I needed my tools to rebuild. Next on my list was the deed to the house. Joint ownership was my only foothold. I drove to City Hall, where the records office was a cramped room smelling of old paper and coffee. A clerk retrieved the deed: Archer and Kyla Mercer, joint tenancy. The words were a lifeline. I traced my finger under my signature, feeling a surge of relief. At least this ground couldn't be walked away from so easily. With the deed in my pocket, I paused in the corridor, staring down the hallway as if expecting Kyla or Yvette to materialize at the end. No one came. The emptiness echoed, reminding me how alone I was in this fight. I returned to my neighborhood, heart pounding as I pulled up 2 blocks down. Through the tinted windows of their driveway, I saw Yvette's SUV and Ronan's battered truck parked side by side. My pulse thumped so loud I could almost hear it in the hush of the street. I slipped out of my car and padded quietly along the side of the house, crouching low until I found the dining room window. Through the glass, I saw Yvette perched at the head of the table, wearing my hoodie once more, her silver hair illuminated by a shaft of morning light. She sipped coffee from my chipped mug, the steam curling up toward her face. Her gaze met mine through the glass, and she didn't look surprised. She looked triumphant. I swallowed around a knot of rage and fear, then slipped back into the shadows and approached the side door. It was unlocked, of course it was. With a soft creak, I eased it open and stepped into the hallway. The scent of brewed coffee and something I couldn't name, an acrid undercurrent of control, washed over me. I moved silently, nearly invisibly, toward the garage door. Through the glass panes, I could see the garbage bags stacked against the wall. Tools lay scattered on the floor, as though someone had rummaged through and discarded anything of importance. Panic and fury warred in my chest. I forced myself to remain calm, knowing that any impulsive move could cost me my legal advantage. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, the familiar echo of concrete underfoot sending a shock through me. That's when I heard her voice. "I told Kyla you'd come back for this." Yvette stood in the garage's center, hands on her hips, elbow pointed toward the bags. She didn't seem startled that I'd entered uninvited. Instead, she narrowed her eyes and leaned back against the doorframe. "You're still on the deed, so you get to collect your things. I won't keep you from that. But don't think you can stay." My chest tightened. I clenched my fists to keep from shaking. "You think this is fair?" I demanded. "You think I'd ever treat your daughter like this?" My voice was raw, but steady. She chuckled, a dry sound that grated against my nerves. "Fair? Life's not fair, sweetheart. You chose your money over your family. You chose to say no to Ronan. And now you're going to say goodbye to everything else, too. Just give me my stuff," I said, voice low. "Leave me my tools, my files. I need them." She inclined her head toward an aisle between the bags. "It's all there. But if you touch one bag that isn't yours, I won't hesitate to call the police." She tipped her chin, expectant. Every instinct told me to launch myself at her, tear open those bags, rescue my life. Instead, I swallowed hard, bent down, and picked up the first bag in the line. It rippled under my grip, sweatshirts, work shirts, the familiar weight of my wardrobe. I set it gently in my bag, then another, and another, as quickly as I could manage without tearing the plastic. Yvette watched, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When I stood with my messenger bag sagging at my side, I met her gaze. "This isn't over," I said. My voice echoed in the cramped space. She flashed that same triumphant smirk. "It's just beginning." I backed out of the garage, refusing to glance at the house that no longer felt like mine. Outside, I exhaled, the air tasting of cold steel and determination. My tools weighed heavy on my back, but they were mine. And I realized something crucial: they could build as well as they could dismantle. And that was exactly what I intended to do. The pre-dawn air was crisp when I returned to the neighborhood, the sky a pale wash of blue-gray, and the street silent except for the distant hum of a lone bus making its rounds. I parked 2 houses down and slipped out of the car, tugging the hood of my sweatshirt over my head and flattening my hand against the garage window to peer inside. Through the dusty glass, I could see Yvette seated on the folding chair once more, sipping coffee from my chipped mug, while Ronan lounged behind her atop a pile of boxes, scrolling through his phone. The garage was a graveyard, my graveyard. Filled with garbage bags distorted by their bulging contents, tools strewn across the floor, and the shredded remains of documents that used to be my job files and personal records. My chest tightened at the sight, but I steadied my breathing, reminding myself that I was still on the deed. This house was still part mine. I stepped back, heart thudding, then pushed open the side door. It creaked ominously, and both Yvette and Ronan looked up. Yvette arched an eyebrow and patted the arm of the chair. "Back again, Archer?" she said with a condescending tilt to her voice. "I told Kyla you'd come for this." She gestured toward the garbage bags. "Your things are all in there. Help yourself." Her smile was brittle, like a shattered porcelain doll. I stepped inside, letting the doors swing shut so that the soft click of the lock resonated behind me. The smell of dust and oil hit me, mixed with the acrid tang of coffee and something else I couldn't name, triumph, maybe, on her part. I swallowed down a wave of anger and said, low and measured, "I'm here for my things." My words echoed against the concrete floor. Ronan snickered, but Yvette hushed him with a flick of her hand. I edged past them, scanning the scene. My toolbox, once meticulously arranged, lay open on the floor. My work files had been shredded into illegible confetti. My birth certificate, wrapped in a plastic sleeve, was missing altogether. Thousands of receipts I'd saved, the originals of my engineering certifications, personal letters, all gone or reduced to shreds. The air was thick with the injustice of it, the thoughtless cruelty. I'd thought they'd at least leave me the essentials. But no, they were intent on erasing me completely. Yvette rose from the chair and stepped forward, puckish smile playing on her lips. I don't know what you're complaining about. Your stuff's here. What else do you want? I clenched my fists at my sides, fighting the urge to grab her by the collar and shake some sense into her. Instead, I reminded myself that I needed to stay calm. Clear-headedness was my only weapon now. I want everything, I said, voice controlled but firm. I want my tools, my files, everything that belongs to me. I nodded toward the shredded papers. Even if it's in pieces. Yvette's lips twitched, but she held her ground. Your stuff's in the bags. Grab it and go. I walked to the first row of garbage bags and knelt down. The plastic was thin enough that I could feel the shape of folded shirts and jeans inside. I tugged at the top of a bag and ripped it open, the plastic tearing with a harsh snap. Cotton and denim tumbled out. I gathered the clothing and folded it hastily, stuffing it into the duffel bag I'd brought with me. Next, I rifled through another bag full of random household items, picture frames, spare cables, an extra laptop charger. Nothing crucial. I set them aside in neat piles. Halfway through, Ronan rose to lean over my shoulder, his breath hot and sour. Finding what you need, he taunted. I didn't look at him. Yvette stepped forward. Ignore him, she said, voice soft but venomous. He can't help himself. I continued sorting through the bags, reaching for a familiar shape, my toolbox. Relief surged as I lifted it free, feeling the cool metal in my hands. I carried it to the side, then returned for more. The frustration built as I encountered bag after bag of ruined items. My carefully preserved engineering notebooks, now damp and stained. My tax returns, shredded into tiny strips. My grandmother's quilt, cut into scrap pieces. I'd taken such care to protect these things, yet here they were, desecrated. I pressed my mouth into a thin line and worked faster. I wouldn't let them see me falter. At last, I approached the final section of the garage, where the larger items had been placed. The old workbench I'd built, the garden supplies I used for weekend projects, and a few boxes bearing the faint handwriting of my mother. When I pried open one of those boxes, I found remnants of family photos, now stained and curling. My childhood, my wedding day, family vacations. I felt my vision blur but blinked hard, fighting the sting of tears. These were sacred to me. I bundled the photos carefully in a plastic sleeve I carried in my coat pocket. I stood up, shoulders heavy with the weight of both my duffel bag and emotional devastation. I met Yvette's gaze, trying to convey in my eyes the enormity of her betrayal. Her expression stayed smug, but I thought I saw a flicker of something, regret, maybe, or guilt, before she masked it. I paused, breathing deeply, and said, You knew some of this you couldn't just throw away. You knew they were important documents. I nodded toward the shredded papers. You had to shred everything to feel like you'd won. She shrugged, as if swatting a fly. I wanted to make sure you felt unwelcome. Her tone was triumphant. Mission accomplished. My blood roared in my ears. I closed my eyes for a moment to calm the storm inside. When I opened them, I spoke in a quiet voice. This isn't over. I'm going to undo every last bit of this. Yvette rolled her eyes, but something in her posture slackened. I slung the duffel over my shoulder and hefted the toolbox in my other hand. Each step back toward the door felt like reclaiming a piece of my dignity. I stopped at the threshold and said, If you touch my property again, I will press charges. You understand me. She dipped her chin dismissively. Do what you like. I exited the garage, the doors swinging shut behind me with a thud that echoed like a promise. Outside, the morning had brightened into a clear spring day, birds singing in the trees, a cruel contrast to the devastation inside. I hoisted my bag and toolbox into the back of my car, then stretched, feeling the muscle memory of every tool, every document, beginning to stir. I slid into the driver's seat, doors locked, and pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. I let out a long breath, tasting both sorrow and resolve. They had tried to erase me. They had failed. Now, I would rebuild, brick by brick, document by document, until every piece of me that had been cast aside was firmly back where it belonged. When I first walked into Mateo Parrish's office, I felt as though I was stepping into a sanctuary. The walls were lined with bookshelves stuffed with legal tomes, those silent sentinels of justice. Sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny witnesses to my plight. Mateo sat behind his massive oak desk, fingers steepled under his chin, watching me with steady, unreadable eyes. He looked unremarkable at first glance, mid-30s, salt and pepper hair, a suit that fit just a touch too loosely, but there was an unmistakable sharpness there, a pragmatism that had earned him his reputation as a razor-sharp litigator. He nodded once as I closed the door behind me. I sank into the leather chair opposite him, memory of the previous days playing on a loop in my mind. The stolen night spent in my car, the cold realization at the bank that my name had been erased, the sight of Yvette in my home wearing my hoodie. I exhaled and began. "Everything's gone," I said, voice tight. "My accounts, my credit, my tools, even my file shredded." I slid the stack of bank statements across the desk, each page a testament to Kyla's betrayal. Mateo's eyes flicked over the numbers, then he laid out a fresh notebook and pen. "Okay," he said quietly. "Walk me through it, step by step." His tone was neither condescending nor sympathetic. It was neutral, businesslike, exactly what I needed. So I told him. I told him about the no that still tasted bitter on my tongue, about walking into my own garage and finding everything I owned packed into trash bags, about the bank's news that I was no longer an account owner. I described Yvette's smug grin, Kyla's silence, Ronan's smirk as he scrolled on his phone. Mateo scribbled furiously, occasionally asking a clarifying question, a date here, a name there, as though he were mapping out the contours of a case. When I finished, Mateo leaned back and studied me. "This is not small," he said at last. "This is a multi-layered campaign. Financial fraud, destruction of property, potential identity theft. There are several avenues we can pursue." Relief washed over me. I'd been floundering in a storm of adrenaline and fear. Here was a lighthouse. Mateo tapped his pen on the desk. "First move, we freeze your credit. Any attempt to open new accounts, transfer funds, or otherwise tamper with your financial identity will set off alarms." I nodded. The notion of regaining even a sliver of control felt like drinking water in the desert. "Next," Mateo continued, "we'll petition the court for an emergency order granting you exclusive use of the house. Your joint deed gives you standing, but we need the judge to physically exclude anyone else until the matter is resolved." I leaned forward. "That means Yvette and Ronan have to move out?" I asked. Mateo smiled slightly. "Exactly." He tapped a printed draft of the filing. "Here's the order. It's straightforward. We'll attach your bank statements, the deed, and a sworn affidavit from you recounting the events." I traced the bold lines of the heading. "In the Circuit Court of County, petitioner, my name." The words felt empowered, a shield against the war they declared. He set the draft aside and tapped another page. "Then we'll seek a court order for the return of your personal property, documents, electronics, family heirlooms. We'll cite the statutes on conversion and destruction of personal property." My stomach tightened at the thought of forcing them to hand over my things, but I relished the promise of retrieving my identity papers and file backups. "What about the files that are shredded?" I asked. Mateo's expression hardened. "We'll include that as evidence of willful destruction. The court can compel them to produce any remaining originals, birth certificate, work contracts, insurance policies, or we'll obtain duplicates through official channels. We'll chain every shred into your case." His final point was delivered low, a caution. "You must avoid direct contact. Let me handle communication. Any threat or confrontation on your part will undermine our case." I nodded, relieved to hand over the burden of negotiation. I'd wanted to storm the house armed with my toolbox, but Mateo's calm rationale reminded me that brute force wasn't my ally here. He stood and offered me a folder with copies of all the filings. "We file these today, you sit back and wait for the hearing. It'll likely be scheduled within days given the emergency nature." I shook his hand, feeling the strength of his grip. "Thank you," I said, and meant every word. As I stepped out of his office, the late afternoon sun was low in the sky, painting the city in gold and shadow. For the first time in days, I felt hope rather than anger. That evening, as I sat in a cheap motel room with a takeout container of food, I unpacked the folder. The legalese blurred at the edges, but each sentence resonated. Prayer for relief, order granting exclusive use, notice of hearing. I texted Arlo that I wouldn't need his couch tonight. I had a plan. I placed a call to a credit monitoring service to enact the freeze. The automated voice confirmed that no new credit could be opened in my name. I allowed myself a small smile, vital progress. I imagined Yvette reading the summons, picturing the shock on her poised features when the sheriff arrived to serve her papers. I envisioned Ronan's smug expression curdling into disbelief as he realized he could be removed from the home, a home he never earned the right to. And Kyla. I didn't know where Kyla stood anymore. Whether she would crumble with guilt or fortify her resolve against me. That was her choice, not mine. I powered down my phone and stared at the ceiling, fatigue pulling at my eyelids. I thought of my dog, Liberty, waiting somewhere for me. I thought of the quiet mornings I'd once spent on our front porch, coffee in hand, planning the next phase of my life with Kyla by my side. All that felt distant, almost unreal. But now I had something solid, a legal mandate, a clear path back to the life that had been stolen. Tomorrow, I'd show up at the courthouse in a crisp shirt and tie, carry my evidence to the bench, and demand what was mine. Mateo would speak, the judge would listen, and they'd issue an order that would turn the tables. The fire Kyla started in my life would be extinguished by the rule of law, and the flames would expose the truth, that I would never be erased. I settled into the worn but welcoming couch at Arlo's apartment, the cushions still bearing faint imprints of his Saturday night gaming marathons. The television glowed silently, paused on last night's game, but my eyes were fixed on the ceiling, tracing cracks I'd never noticed before. Even here, in this temporary refuge, I couldn't shake the tension knitting through my shoulders. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, its screen showing blocked number in dull gray letters. Every instinct told me to ignore it. Blocked meant trouble, but I needed to know who was calling me now. I tapped the answer button and held the phone to my ear. A distorted laugh crackled through the speaker, harsh and mocking. "You can stop crying now," came Ronan's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. My heart hammered. Every nerve in my body tightened. "Kyla's done with you," he continued, amusement lacing each syllable. "We all are." He paused, let me absorb the sting of his words, then leaned in, as though sharing a secret. "Oh, and your laptop? You might want to change your passwords. Some of your work stuff's real interesting to look at." The line clicked before I could respond. I stared at the phone as if it were a rattlesnake, venomous and unexpected. My breath caught in my throat, a mix of anger, fear, and disbelief swirling in my chest. I slipped the phone into my pocket and leaned forward, pressing my elbows into my knees. The fluorescent light above flickered, and for a moment the room felt suspended between shadows. Arlo glanced up from his game controller. "Everything okay?" he asked, concern evident in his tone. I forced a nod, though the tremor in my hands betrayed me. "It's Ronan," I said softly. I relayed the contents of the call, the taunts about Kyla, the threat regarding my laptop and work files. Arlo's jaw clenched. "That's harassment," he said, voice low. "You recorded it, right?" I nodded again, fishing the phone out and showing him the recording icon still blinking on the screen. "Good," he said. "Record everything. Then let's call the police." I appreciated Arlo's steadfast presence. In this whirlwind of deceit and betrayal, he offered a calm harbor. Together, we drove to the local precinct, its brick facade squat and unassuming, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging in my mind. Inside, the air smelled of institutional cleaning products and muffled conversation. A uniformed officer motioned us toward a side desk, where a detective leaned back in his chair, studying a file. I explained the situation, my account stripped, my home invaded, now this call suggesting unauthorized access to my personal and professional data. I handed over my phone, and with trembling fingers, played the recording. The detective's expression hardened as Ronan's mocking tone filled the cramped interview room. "Harassment," he confirmed. "Intentional, targeted, and documented. We'll file a report." He scribbled details into the computer, clicking submit with finality. I felt a measure of relief, as though the weight on my chest had lifted slightly. But I knew the threat was real. I wasn't dealing with ordinary squabbles. I was up against people who would cross legal lines without hesitation. We left the station with a case number and a promise that an investigation would follow. But the detective's parting advice echoed ominously. Be cautious. Harassers often escalate when they know the police are involved. Back at Arlo's, I paced the length of the living room, running scenarios through my head. Ronan's words about my laptop gnawed at me. My computer held sensitive project files, client prototypes, emails I couldn't afford to have exposed or tampered with. I powered on the laptop, hands still shaking, and logged in. Everything seemed intact, but that didn't mean someone hadn't left a digital Trojan in the shadows, ready to pounce. I ran a full system scan, held my breath as progress bars crawled across the screen, and then installed every security update I could find. I changed passwords, bank, email, work portals, each new string more complex than the last. When I finished, I felt a brittle sense of security, as though I'd patched a breach in a dam that still threatened to burst. Late that night, as Arlo snored softly on the couch behind me, I sat at his kitchen table, sifting through emails and messages. Among them, a notification from my company's IT department flagged an unauthorized login attempt from an unfamiliar IP address. My blood ran cold. Whoever had called was testing my defenses even while I'd been at the station. I forwarded the alert to Mateo. Within 10 minutes, his reply arrived. File a second report, cyber intrusion. I'll draft a cease and desist letter for immediate service. Don't communicate with them again. I drafted the cyber report online, recounting the attempted intrusion, the stolen financial access, the harassment call. My hands weren't shaking so much now. Adrenaline had given way to steely determination. I attached screenshots of the login alerts, my recording of Ronan's call, and the bank statement showing the unauthorized transfers. With one final click, I submitted it. A confirmation number popped up, case number 347195. This was now a multi-pronged legal offensive, civil, criminal, and digital. When I finally lay down to sleep in the guest bedroom, exhaustion overtook me immediately. My mind swirled with plans, freezing credit, court orders, police reports. But beneath it all lay a single, unbreakable truth. I would not be driven from my life without a fight. My identity, my career, my home were worth at battle. And I had more allies than enemies. Mateo was preparing legal paperwork. The police were investigating. Arlo offered unwavering support. Even my coworkers watched my back. As I drifted into sleep, I pictured Ronan's smug grin replaced by confusion and fear when a judge's gavel brought down an order forbidding him from a 3-block radius, and when police arrived at his door demanding answers about the stolen data. I pictured Yvette's poised composure crumbling under legal scrutiny. I pictured Kyla, wherever she was confronted by evidence of betrayal she could no longer deny. In the quiet of the night, as my breath evened out and my heartbeat slowed, I found a measure of peace. I had transformed from a man stripped bare into one with a strategy, a fortress of legal shields and technological defenses. Ronan's taunts were nothing but noise against the chorus of evidence and procedural justice I was assembling. Tomorrow, I would meet with Mateo again, tighten the screws, and press forward. But for now, I closed my eyes and let the darkness envelop me, certain that the dawn would find me stronger, more resolved, and ready to reclaim every piece of my life. The morning after I filed the cyber intrusion report, the world felt a shade darker, as though the shadows had grown longer overnight. I drove to the office with my heart pounding, each traffic light a new surge of adrenaline. The rows of cubicles greeted me like silent sentinels, the hum of phones and tapping of keyboards a background static I usually found comforting. Today it felt like a countdown. Dana, my manager, appeared at my door before I even reached my desk, her expression polite but tight. "Morning," she said. "Something came up. HR flagged an unusual request for your tax and salary information. They didn't think you made that call. Can you come by later so we can clear this up?" I froze for a moment, realizing the depth of the attack. My enemies weren't content with harassing me at home or wiping out my accounts. Now they were trying to undermine my professional reputation. If they succeeded, I could lose my job, which would crush any hope of financial recovery. I masked my panic behind a calm nod. "Absolutely," I said. "Thanks for letting me know." She offered a small, reassuring smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, and excused herself. I closed my office door and sank into my chair, running a hand through my hair. They were building a case against me, against my integrity, by pretending to be me and seeking the very records that would expose my contributions and responsibilities. If they got access to my W-2s, my direct deposit statements, my expense reports, they could fabricate evidence to show I wasn't pulling my weight, that perhaps I wasn't even employed. I pulled out every scrap of documentation I had left. Pay stubs printed weeks ago, utility bills in my name, receipts from business trips, invoices for client work. I opened a fresh spreadsheet on my laptop and began logging every contribution I'd made over the past year, dollar amounts, dates, account numbers, memo lines. Every transaction that showed my mortgage payments, my shared household expenses, even the monthly Venmo transfers I'd made to Kyla for groceries. It was tedious work, but necessary. While I filled in the cells, I realized this dossier could serve two purposes: defend me at work and bolster my case in court. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd show them I knew every dirty trick, too. By midday, I had a binder stuffed with organized sections: employment verification, financial contributions, IT logs, personal property. Each tab was labeled, each page numbered. I printed multiple copies and thumbed through them as I walked to HR. I spotted Dana in the hallway, talking softly with an HR specialist. They both looked up when I approached. Dana stepped forward first. "Thanks for coming so quickly," she said. "They thought you might be the one who called. HR just wants to verify." I offered her a controlled smile. "Let me explain." We moved into a small conference room with sterile walls and a round table that had seen too many meetings like this. The HR specialist, a woman named Thomas, motioned for me to sit. I took my binder and placed it prominently on the table. "I understand you received a request for my tax documents and salary history." I began. "That request did not come from me. It was an unauthorized access attempt. I've provided you with my own verified documents." I opened the binder to the Employment Verification tab and handed copies to both women. "Here are my pay stubs for the last 12 months, a letter from payroll confirming my current salary, and the IT department's log showing no internal request for additional information from my account." I paused to let them scan the pages. Dana's shoulders eased. Thomas frowned at the documents. "This is comprehensive," she said, flipping through the logs. "We've never seen someone bring this level of detail before." I leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "They're building a narrative to paint me as untrustworthy, maybe to justify reducing my hours or denying me support. I can't let that happen." Thomas set the papers aside. "We'll flag this in your file and alert the managers not to honor any tax information requests without your written consent." Dana nodded in agreement. Relief washed through me, a tide of gratitude I didn't expect. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I appreciate your help." As I left the room, Dana gave me a quick hug. "Hang in there," she whispered. I offered a small smile and walked back to my desk, binder in hand. The cubicles felt less menacing now, the hum less oppressive. That evening, I retreated to my temporary office at Arlo's apartment. I flopped into the chair and stared at the stack of binders on the table. My eyes settled on the Venmo data buried under financial contributions. Scrolling through the app's archive, I confirmed every transaction: monthly payments to Ronan labeled support, help, rent. The sum over the past year was staggering, nearly $10,000. That explained the near-empty bank accounts. They'd been cleaning me out to bankroll Ronan's stay and pad Yvette's claims of burden. The betrayal cut deep. Kyla had been aware, had allowed it. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, feeling a reservoir of strength widen within me. The next day, I drafted a motion to present this financial evidence in court, supplementing Mateo's filings. I wrote a concise summary. Petitioners' direct contributions to household expenses were diverted without consent to a third party, constituting conversion of marital assets. I attached screenshots of the Venmo ledger and calculated the total loss. With one last review, I emailed the motion to Mateo with the subject line: "New evidence, hidden transfers." His reply came within minutes: "Excellent work. We'll incorporate this right away." I closed my laptop, savoring a rare moment of accomplishment amid the chaos. That night, I walked Liberty, my dog, my steadfast companion, along the quiet street near Arlo's place. The cool air was a balm to my frayed nerves. Liberty sniffed at each lamppost, tail wagging, unaware of the storm that had uprooted our lives. I ran a hand over her soft fur, her steady presence grounding me. I realized that while they had tried to destroy my life, my home, my finances, my reputation, they couldn't break my spirit. Each fact I uncovered, every document I secured, was a brick in a new foundation. And with Liberty by my side, I had the resolve to see this through. In the days that followed, our case moved forward with a surprising momentum. Mateo filed the supplementary motion, and the court granted a hearing date sooner than expected. The week culminated in a judicial conference where the judge reviewed the evidence in chambers. I stood outside the courtroom door afterward, adrenaline thrumming through me as the bailiff handed me a file-stamped order. I opened it to find that not only had the judge issued the exclusive use order for the house, but he had also recognized the financial harm due to the unauthorized transfers. The order included a preliminary injunction prohibiting Kyla and Yvette from removing or disposing of any marital assets, and a directive that Ronan vacate the premises within 24 hours. My vision blurred as relief and vindication crashed over me. I drove straight to the house, clutching the order. Yvette's SUV and Ronan's truck were still parked in the driveway, oblivious to the legal storm brewing. I parked 2 blocks away and approached the front door with measured steps. Liberty walked at my side, her leash taut with purpose. I knocked firmly. Inside, footsteps echoed. The door cracked open, and Yvette's face appeared, pale, stunned. I held up the paper. "You've got 1 day," I said quietly. "The court says so." Her eyes darted to the document, comprehension and fury warring in her gaze. Ronan emerged behind her, bleary-eyed. He took one look at the order and nodded, like a condemned man. Yvette's lips pressed into a thin line. "You think the judge cares about your mess?" she hissed. I let Liberty step forward and plant her paws on the welcome mat. "He does," I said, and his word is final. I turned away, chest heaving, as Ronan's truck rumbled past me. Yvette slammed the door shut, but I heard the engine roar out of the driveway. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the weight of despair lift, replaced by the steady warmth of victory. I patted Liberty's head and whispered, "We're going home, girl." And together, we walked down the street toward the house I'd fought to reclaim, ready to rebuild our life from the ashes of their deceit. When Mateo called me into his office early that morning, I sensed urgency in his tone before I even closed the door behind me. He motioned me to a seat, the late afternoon sun slanting through the blinds and casting striped shadows across his polished desk. His usually calm expression was taut, as though he'd just swallowed something bitter. "They've gone public," he said, voice low. I felt a cold prickle of dread as he slid a printed screenshot across the desk. Yvette's Facebook post, an epic screed full of venomous half-truths and outright lies. She accused me of abandoning Kyla in her time of need, of trying to evict a vulnerable recovering cousin, and worst of all, of stealing from my own wife. Her words were plastered on her wall, shared by dozens of mutual acquaintances, and tagged with my LinkedIn profile. My chest tightened. I glanced at Mateo, who tapped the paper with a pen. "Defamation," he said simply. "And we need to strike back before this goes further." He handed me a draft letter, cease and desist, demand for retraction, threat of lawsuit if she didn't remove those posts within 24 hours. "We'll file this today," he continued. "But you need to consider a more aggressive move, public notice of your own, laying out the facts with supporting evidence." I nodded, heart thumping. The idea of dragging our private nightmare into the spotlight frightened me, but I knew silence would only let the rumors fester. Later that day, I sat at my temporary desk in Arlo's spare room, drafting a concise statement. I had been unlawfully removed from bank accounts, my personal property stolen and destroyed, and false allegations circulated to cover up the real perpetrators. I attached scanned copies of the bank statements, the court order granting me exclusive use of the house, and affidavits from the police confirming the harassment and digital intrusion reports. I prepared it for distribution to my professional network, to HR, to the local community page where Yvette's post had appeared. The words flowed with surprising clarity. The injustice lent them a fierce energy. Before clicking send, I paused, recalling Kyla's face when she'd last seen me. She'd worn indifference like armor, but I suspected guilt still lingered beneath. I reflected on the bond we'd shared, how I'd once believed our partnership unbreakable, and realized that now I fought not just for my reputation, but for the truth itself. I clicked post, my stomach churning, and waited. Within minutes, colleagues reached out in private messages, expressing concern, offering support, assuring me they'd seen the truth in the documents. HR forwarded the statement to all managers. The neighborhood page's moderators removed Yvette's rant and blocked her account. That evening, I received an unexpected phone call from Serena, Arlo's girlfriend. "I saw your post," she said, voice quiet but steady. "I want you to know that video they posted, of you arguing with Kyla, was heavily edited. You were frustrated? Yes, but never violent. I have the full footage." My heart pounded as she described how Kyla had spliced the recording to cast me in the worst possible light. Serena offered to share the uncut version as evidence. Within an hour, I downloaded the file, a 30-minute clip that showed the genuine context. My calm protest, Kyla's interruptions, Ronan's interjections. The piece de resistance I hadn't known I needed. I emailed the full video to Mateo along with my statement. asking him to file it as evidence in our defamation case and to send it to the court and to local news outlets if necessary. As I hit send, a sense of vindication washed over me. They'd tried to smear my name, undermine my career, and erase my contributions, but I'd turned their smears into proof of their deception. The digital battlefield had shifted in my favor. That night, as I lay in Arlo's guest room, I felt a weary surge of hope. The next moves would be strategic legal filings and, if required, public outreach. But for the first time, I knew the truth would prevail, and that the web of lies they spun would unravel under the weight of evidence and integrity. When I walked into the courthouse that morning, the marble steps felt impossibly cold beneath my polished shoes, a silent reminder that justice could be as frigid as it was powerful. I adjusted my tie, squared my shoulders, and stepped through the heavy doors into the hushed grandeur of the lobby. Gavel strikes and echoing voices drifted from the courtrooms ahead, mingling with the distant hum of fluorescent lights overhead. My heart thumped in my chest, not from nerves, but from a fierce sense of purpose. Today, I would reclaim my home and expose the criminal living within its walls. Mateo met me at the entrance to Judge Harper's courtroom, briefcase in hand and a reassuring nod on his face. We exchanged a quick glance, no words necessary. He had prepared me for this moment, laying out the strategy to file our motions for harassment, defamation, and, most decisively, Ronan's parole violation. I reached into my suit pocket and gave my folder of evidence a firm squeeze: bank statements, the unedited video, police reports, and, buried at the bottom, Ronan's parole record specifying the 500-foot school exclusion. Our home sat 3 houses down from Maple Grove Elementary. The violation was undeniable. Inside, the judge's bench sat elevated, its polish wood gleaming under soft lighting. I took the stand when called and recited the facts succinctly. My joint deed, the account theft, the invasions of privacy, culminating in Ronan's unlawful residence so close to the school. The courtroom was attentive, the judge's eyebrows arching when I handed over the signed parole documents. Mateo had already laid the groundwork, a temporary injunction barring Kyla and Yvette from contact, but this was the moment to seal Ronan's fate. When Mateo presented Ronan's official record, the prosecutor leaned forward, eyes narrowing in interest. The judge read quietly, then looked up. "Mr. Mercer," he said, voice calm but authoritative, "this is a clear breach of parole conditions." He tapped the paper thoughtfully. "I intend to issue an order for immediate removal of Mr. Ronan from the premises and direct law enforcement to take him into custody." Relief surged through me as the judge's words echoed in the room. I felt Liberty's presence at my side, her gentle nudge against my pant leg as though celebrating with me. Kyla sat a few rows back, flanked by Yvette, both in somber attire. Kyla's expression was a mix of shame and defiance, though her eyes betrayed uncertainty. She met my gaze for an instant. No apology, but an unspoken understanding that her complicity had finally been exposed. Yvette's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes flicking away as though she had crumbled the moment reality struck. The bailiff stepped forward, eyes locked on the doors, ready to execute the order. Outside, Ronan sat at a defense table, shoulders slumped, pride drained from his posture. When the bailiff read the judge's directive, Ronan rose, hands cuffed behind his back, without a single protest. The courtroom gasped softly as he was let out, head bowed, eyes flicking toward me with a mixture of resentment and defeat. I exhaled, a long breath that released weeks of tension and fear. Once the courtroom emptied, I stayed behind with Mateo to finalize paperwork for the permanent exclusion order and to address Kyla's temporary spousal support motion, denied, thanks to the evidence of her financial deception. The clerk filed the paperwork, and I watched the judge sign each order with decisive strokes. My name, my house, and my peace had been vindicated by the very system they had tried to manipulate. As I stepped back into the sunlight outside the courthouse, I felt lighter, as though a great weight had lifted from my shoulders. Liberty bounded alongside me, tail wagging in joyous arcs. I bent to scratch her ears. "We did it, girl," I whispered. The world smelled differently now. Crisp air, fresh possibilities, freedom reclaimed. Later, I drove straight to the house, this time with a spare key I'd secured weeks earlier. The door swung open easily, and I inhaled the familiar scent of home: old hardwood floors, faint lavender, and that lingering hint of coffee. Kyla stood in the entryway, tear-streaked but steady. She said nothing. Her silence spoke volumes. I set down my briefcase and stepped past her, calling softly, "Liberty?" The dog raced into the living room, circling me with joyful barks. I knelt to hug her, ignoring the vulnerability in the moment. Then I rose and turned to Kyla. "This is over," I said quietly. "You can leave, or you can stay and start rebuilding." My voice held no bitterness, only clarity. She nodded once, head bowed, and left the room. Alone at last, I closed the door, leaned my back against it, and let the stillness settle around me. The echoes of betrayal had faded, replaced by the measured cadence of my own breath. I looked around the living room, intact once more, thanks to court orders preventing further tampering, and felt a quiet pride. The house that had turned on me now welcomed me home. The war was won. Now came the work of healing and reconstruction. And as I gazed out the window onto the street, knowing Ronan would never darken our threshold again, I realized I had earned more than victory. I had earned back my name, my home, and above all, my peace. The silence in the house was the first thing I noticed. No blaring TV, no footsteps stomping across the hardwood, no loud phone conversations in the kitchen. Just quiet, steady, calming, complete. I stood in the foyer, Liberty at my side, as the afternoon light spilled in through the front windows. Everything felt still, like the house itself was waiting to exhale. For weeks, it had been under siege, invaded by voices that didn't belong, cluttered with judgment and control. But now, it was mine again. The judge's ruling had been swift and clear, exclusive use of the home awarded to me. Ronan had 24 hours to vacate. Kyla was barred from any digital contact unless it pertained directly to legal proceedings. And spousal support? Denied. The court had seen through the charade, through the edited footage, the manufactured pity, the facade of helplessness. Ronan had tried to run. Yvette had wailed like someone had died. And in a way, something had their grip on my life. I watched from across the street when Ronan was arrested. His truck didn't even make it out of the driveway. Liberty sat calmly beside me as officers cuffed him on my lawn. Kyla stood frozen on the porch, her pearl earrings catching the sun, her mouth trembling as she tried to understand how it had all fallen apart. Yvette shouted at the officers, waving papers, but no one listened. Not anymore. 2 months later, Kyla tried to claw something back, petitioning for 50-50 on the house, for access to accounts she thought I couldn't touch. But the courts disagreed. I had proof of every stolen dollar, every manipulated file. The account she'd opened in secret? Already frozen. The lawyer she'd hired? Outmaneuvered by Mateo before the first hearing ended. I kept the house. I got full control of our joint savings. I reopened my personal account under my name alone. Liberty had her old bed back in the corner of the living room, and I had my Sunday mornings, black coffee, silence, and sunrise. Yvette is currently under investigation for digital harassment and identity fraud. I haven't heard from her since. As for me, I'm back at work. My credit is clean, my reputation intact. The clients who saw the smear campaign reached out, not with suspicion, but support. Turns out truth travels slower than lies, but it hits harder when it lands. And Liberty? She sleeps by the door now, ears twitching at peace, not at alarm. Her name fits now more than ever, because this wasn't just about theft or betrayal.